In 2012, a quiet church in Spain accidentally broke the internet when a painting of Christ was restored into something unrecognizable. It wasn't supposed to be funny. It wasn't supposed to be viral. It was supposed to be sacred. But that's the thing about art. Sometimes it refuses to behave. Round eyes, smeared features, a face that somehow resembled a monkey more than a man. Suddenly, centuries of quiet devotion were replaced by global laughter. But what if I told you that this epic fail saved the town that created it? Maybe the real miracle wasn't on the wall, but in what happened next. So this is the story of how one elderly woman, a little paint, and a big misunderstanding made the world laugh out loud and a small town thrive. Long before the laughter, before the memes and headlines, there was simply a wall, and on that wall, a quiet face. The original fresco Ecce Homo, also known as Behold the Man, was painted around 1930 by Elias Garcia Martinez, a professor at Zaragoza School of Art. It wasn't a masterpiece of the Renaissance or a treasure of the Prado. It was small, barely 20 inches tall, but it carried something deeper. Martinez had painted it as a gift, a gesture of faith for the Sanctuary of Mercy, a modest church tucked away in Borja, a sleepy village in northeastern Spain where olive groves meet the hills. He once described it as 2 hours of devotion to the Virgin of Mercy. The fresco depicted Christ crowned with thorns, eyes lowered, lips parted in quiet suffering. His face, though simple, was gentle, human, almost tender. To the people of Borja, it was more than pigment on plaster. It was a companion, a face that had seen their baptisms, their weddings, their funerals. A presence that never left the wall, even as generations came and went. But time, as always, showed no mercy. The painting had been done in oil on dry plaster and was never meant to last. Seasons passed, winters dampened the walls, and moisture began its slow assault. Cracks appeared like veins beneath the surface. The colours dulled, then flaked. Christ's gaze, once serene, began to fade into shadow. By the early 2000s, the image was a ghost of itself, outlines blurring, details dissolving. The crown of thorns melted into the background. The sacred face that had once looked out over Borja was now slipping into obscurity. It was just time, doing what time always does. And for the villagers who prayed there, watching their Christ slowly disappear felt like watching a part of themselves fade away too. And that's when Cecilia Jimenez stepped in. At 81 years old, full of faith and armed with a paintbrush she probably shouldn't have trusted, to the people of the town, she was kind, pious, and a little eccentric. The sort of woman who still believed that love and effort can fix almost anything. She had painted small religious images before, modest retouchings in nearby convents, and when she saw the fading face of Christ, she felt something stir inside her. How could she sit by and watch him disappear? So one summer day, armed with nothing but a paintbrush, a few jars of household paint, and a heart full of devotion, Cecilia decided to act. With no restoration degree, with no conservation tools, but just faith. She began her work in full view of the world, or at least of anyone who walked through the church doors. Stroke by stroke, she tried to revive the Saviour she had prayed to all her life. At first, she started small, retouching the tunic, softening the outline. But as the days went on, her confidence grew, and her brush moved upward toward the face. That was where everything changed. The texture was wrong, the colours bled, the lines thickened. But Cecilia pressed on, convinced that with enough patience and care, she could bring him back to life. What she didn't know, what no one could have known, was that this act of devotion was about to rewrite art history, because when she finally stepped back to admire her work, the world would never be the same again. And then, the moment came. Cecilia stepped back, expecting to see the familiar face of Christ, serene, solemn, merciful. But what she saw instead made her heart skip. The face of Christ had vanished. The eyes were no longer full of sorrow. They were round, blank, almost cartoonish. The gentle features had melted into a swirl of beige and brown. The mouth, once soft with compassion, now looked like it was gasping for air. It didn't look human. It didn't look divine. It looked like something else entirely. Christ had not been restored. He had been reborn as a meme. A creature caught between a crayon sketch and a monkey, an image so strange, so sincere in its failure, that it hovered somewhere between tragedy and comedy. At first, the church was silent. Locals whispered, a few stifled their laughter, others just stared in disbelief. Then someone took a photo, and in the age of the internet, that was all it took. Within hours, the image had escaped Borja. Twitter exploded with captions and comparisons. Facebook turned the fresco into profile pictures and parody posters. Headlines wrote themselves. Restoration gone wrong. The monkey messiah. Behold the fail. And memes multiplied at light speed. Someone photoshopped the face onto the Mona Lisa, another put it on Mount Rushmore, a few even prayed to it, ironically at first. And the world couldn't look away. It was absurd, it was hilarious, and somehow it was irresistibly human. A sleepy Spanish village had become the centre of global laughter, and for the first time in history, a painting had gone viral. Not for its beauty, but for its failure. But what no one knew yet was that this disaster would soon change everything for Borja. People started showing up, not to grieve, not to protest, but to see it. First, a few curious locals, then reporters, then waves of tourists with cameras, laughter and disbelief. They lined up outside the Sanctuary of Mercy, waiting for their turn to meet the internet's most famous mistake. The town of Borja, once fading into silence, suddenly had life again. Hotels filled up, cafes spilled over with chatter, souvenir shops popped up selling mugs, t-shirts and postcards printed with that unforgettable face. The church began charging a small entry fee, just €1 at first, but it added up quickly. Within months, the failed fresco had raised tens of thousands for charity and restoration. Within a few years, over €250,000. Money flowed in to repair the church, support the elderly, and revive the community that had been quietly disappearing. The once ridiculed artwork became a symbol, and in its own bizarre way, salvation. Cecilia Jimenez, the woman once mocked by millions, was suddenly honoured in exhibitions and documentaries. She had wanted to preserve a piece of her faith, and instead, she preserved her town. And so, Behold the Man became something else entirely. Behold the monkey. Maybe this wasn't a tragedy after all. Maybe it was a blessing in disguise. A divine joke that only time could explain. One where the laughter itself became holy. And here's the quiet lesson hidden beneath all the laughter. Why do we fear imperfection in sacred art? Why do we believe that beauty must always be flawless? that devotion must always look professional. We worship the idea of preservation, of keeping things untouched, unchanged, as if decay itself were a sin. But maybe that's the real illusion. Maybe what we call failure is just honesty, stripped of polish, stripped of reverence. Because the truth is, Cecilia's brushstrokes came from love, not ego. Her hands trembled, not with pride, but with care. And in that moment of imperfection, something deeply human slipped through the cracks of tradition. Art critics saw a disaster, the internet saw a meme, but Borja saw a heartbeat. Messy, clumsy, real. After all, what's more human than trying to fix something broken and failing beautifully? Maybe that's what sacred art was always meant to do, not to remind us of perfection, but to remind us of us. If you enjoyed uncovering the strange story behind this painting, you'll love what's coming next. More hidden histories that prove art is never what it seems.